All right, it's 4:03. I only see a couple of people in the participants list. So if you know anyone who's trying to join and having trouble, shoot me an email. Otherwise, we'll get started. Welcome, everybody. This is the June 8th meeting of the Short-Term Rental Advisory Committee. We have most of our panelists have joined us, and we are ready to begin. As always, there will be time at the end of the meeting for public comment. If you'd like to make a public comment, use the raise hand feature on Zoom. You can raise your hand at any time during the meeting to indicate that you'd like to make a public comment at the end. If you are calling in on your telephone and you can't use the raise hand feature, you can sign up for public comment by emailing me at erica.rogers@denvergov.org at any time during the meeting, and I'll check that before we start. So we'll start with the licensing and enforcement updates, starting with our application data. So since last year, since the pandemic, we've been kind of monitoring the number of applications that have been coming in, both new and renewal. So here, as you can see, as of June 2nd, we had only 118 total pending applications, and most of those, almost half, 48, are awaiting applicant action. 52 of those are under review by excise and license. Another 12 are under review by another city agency, and 5 are awaiting a denial appeal hearing. The past couple of months, we've seen a pretty steady influx of new and renewal applications. So in March, we received 132 applications, 68 of which were new and 64 were for renewals. In April, we received 146 applications, 94 of which were for new and 52 were for renewals. And then last month in May, we got 105 total applications, 62 of which were for new short-term rentals and 43 for renewals. Looking at those numbers in context with other months over the last year and the past couple of years, you can see that we are seeing that orange bar is 2021 compared to the blue bar of 2020 and the gray bar of 2019. So we're still not at 2019 levels for total number of new applications. However, we are seeing an increase from 2020 for this time last year. This is the same chart for renewals. So 2019 in gray, 2020 in blue, and then this year in orange. Our renewals saw our highest numbers in the last couple of years back in January, and they're about on par, just a little bit less than the last couple of years. Looking at applications and disciplinary action. So of those new and renewal applications, we're seeing fewer and fewer people who are withdrawing or closed administratively. We're also seeing, pretty high compliance with our affidavits on a cumulative basis. So since the last STRAC meeting, we've had 4 applications withdrawn. That's a total of 42 within the last year and 302 total. Since the last STRAC, we've had 13 applications closed administratively. This happens if somebody doesn't finish their application within a year, they get closed administratively. We've had 78 of those within the past year and 248 total. Another piece of data that we've been talking about are the calendar records requests. We have had 164 total since August of 2020 and 17 since the last STRAC meeting. For enforcement efforts, our affidavits, these are the affidavits of primary residence. We have sent a total of 735 since we started doing this several years ago. 130 of those have been in the past year and 19 have been in the last 2 months. What we're seeing is with those return rates, 7 of those 19 in the last 2 months have been returned, and 71 of the 130 in the last year have been returned. So we're seeing, for a total of about 45% of those affidavits returned. Just like last time, we have 0 outstanding orders to show cause. So we don't have any licenses that are awaiting a show cause hearing for suspension or revocation of the license.
Quick question.
Sure.
Within the past year, is that the last 12 months or is that in 2021?
That's the last 12 months. And it looks like we had a couple more panelists in the attendee list, so I'm going to promote them and just pause for a second to see if anybody else has any questions.
I do have a question.
Okay.
If they do not return an affidavit, what is the remedy?
If
The application's closed as incomplete.
Thanks, Brian.
Yep. That's that closed administratively. They never finish it and it closes.
Thank you.
Mhm. Any other questions? We have 2 raised hands. Mary Lou?
Do we assume that if we close them administratively, that they aren't operating an STR, or we don't know?
We don't know.
There's a couple of different kind of considerations there. So we don't, I would say we don't assume anything. If somebody applies at, say, 100 Broadway and they never finish their application, we're not necessarily going to 100 Broadway to find out if they have a short-term rental, but if they come up on our compliance software, then we take action. So it's kind of 2 separate systems operating on the same thing, if that makes sense.
Yep, it does. Thanks.
Okay.
There could be any number of reasons someone doesn't finish an application, right? Maybe they think they want to do it and, then the pandemic hits and they say, oh, nope, I'm going to be here for a year, so I'm not going to finish that application. There's all different kind of reasons why it might be closed administratively. That's just one of them. Okay, so we don't have a slide for this, but we did find out this morning some numbers on the compliance data from our new compliance software. So I just wanted to give that update quickly here. We have a total of 3,055 active listings. And of those, 2,141 have a BFN number. So we are, excited to have this data again. We'll start including it in the graphs, but we've had some folks on vacation, so we weren't able to get that information put into a graph in time for this afternoon. But it is looking like we have our licensure rate of around 70%, but that doesn't take into account duplicates. So it's probably in actuality higher than that. And we'll have a pretty detailed readout of that at the next meeting. Moving on to our 311 data. These are the calls that we get from 311 asking us about, how do I pay my citation? What do I do with this notice of violation? General questions, and then, property complaints. So as you can see, each color is a different month of this year. By far, our most popular category is people with questions about how to apply or renew. So we've kind of leveled off from earlier this year, but we are, that is the most calls we get. We also get a lot of general inquiries, and then we do get just a handful of complaints.
Erica?
Oh, yeah.
Quick question about the compliance data information that you gave us. Who are we using now?
The name of the software is called Hamari.
Okay, thank you.
Brian, is that the full name?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Yes, Hamari. That's Hamari.
Thanks.
You're welcome. Looking at that 311 data as it relates year over year, right? So in this one, we've got 2021 in green, that's our year to date. Red is last year, 2020, and then blue was 2019. So we saw a significant decrease in the number of property complaints, inquiries and questions, and calls about administrative citations and notices of violation last year as compared with 2019. But we did see more questions about applications and renewals. So interestingly, this year we've exceeded even what we saw last year on that applications and renewals. So it's looking to be our most popular category year to date. You can see that raw data there with 742, higher than any of the other calls that we've gotten so far this year. And then just looking at that same data another way, looking at the volume, the total volume, we're still about at a third of what we were seeing in 2019. But, you know, creeping up on 2020 numbers pretty quickly. Again, that 71% is that applications and renewals. So that is the most popular topic. Now for the lodgers tax update. So I've put a star here because in addition to the business department, business licensing department getting new compliance software, the tax department has also undergone a technology upgrade. So I think we've got Sophia with us today if she wants to talk about any of these numbers, but just be advised that the starred numbers for those 2021 year-to-date numbers and the, the number of lodgers tax accounts and business licenses, those are all approximated based on those software upgrades. So, you know, take that with a grain of salt.
I don't really have any other comments than what's on the year to date. It seems like the percentage of lodgers tax coming from short-term rentals is consistently growing year over year. So the industry is definitely a large component of our total lodgers tax collected. Are there any questions on the taxes? No?
I don't see anyone with their hand raised, so.
Okay. Thanks, Erica.
All right. Thank you, Sophia. And as I mentioned, between Thursday when I sent these slides out and this afternoon, we did get an update on the active short-term rental business licenses. That is a little bit higher. So it's 2,141 as of today. All right, moving on to current events. So we've got a couple of short-term rental updates. First and foremost, kind of in line with that licensure number, there was a story the other day about how Denver short-term rental licenses are almost at pre-pandemic levels. So that is good. We're happy to see that things are starting to get back to normal, at least in this industry, you know, fairly quickly. And we're anticipating, you know, great opportunities for this summer as those licensure rates are up. In line with that, that's also a trend, not just here in Denver, but nationwide. Several stories have talked about how short-term rentals are seeing high demand levels, even some places struggling with supply as people's comfort levels are, you know, maturing at different rates. And so I've linked 3 different stories about that in the second bullet. An interesting update on technology. I don't know how many people use Google to look for flights or hotels. They have a product in their travel suite that, you know, when you Google flights to Denver or hotels in Denver, they've now added a search product that shows private rentals who are also for travelers who are looking for accommodations. So it'll show hotels and short-term rentals. So you can read more about that at that link. And then finally, an interesting piece, there were several articles written about this. There is an algorithm that Airbnb uses for optional reporting, and there's been some discussion about whether It has been helping mitigate any kind of racial income inequality when it comes to the short-term rental industry. So I thought those were some pretty fascinating articles. So I've linked several sources if you want to read more about that. Any questions or comments here?
I do have one comment. And
Okay.
this is more about Colorado. There's been a lot of TV coverage about Summit County, Eagle County, places in our more touristy areas that are having a critical shortage of worker housing due to short-term rentals. So I think that's interesting on the whole scope of everything, that we're losing our private residences in parts of Colorado.
That is interesting. Fortunately, a problem that we don't seem to have here in Denver.
Yeah, not yet.
Looks like Councilwoman Sawyer has her hand raised, and then Aaron as well.
Thanks, Erica. Just wanted to ask you guys about the BizDen article that I read the other day, and actually we had a press inquiry about in my office. So essentially, without kind of getting into all the details of it, it looks like maybe it is a hotel that is being used as short-term rental, or some sort of business model that is a hybrid hotel and short-term rental model. Wondering if you guys have taken a look at that, what you think might happen with that, or if you've seen the article and kind of what you guys think about that.
Sure. Yeah, we did see the article, and it is interesting because I think so many. So there's been so much press about short-term rentals that when new things that look and feel or seem sort of similar to short-term rentals come up, people think, oh, is this in compliance? But just like we've seen with some other emerging lodging models, right? Loftium, Daydream, Sonder, at first glance, it may seem like a short-term rental, but in actuality, it's something a little different, right? It's not the primary residence model. It's not a family or a person trying to make extra income off of their home. It's, either a commercial hotel, or it's a facility, or it's essentially a hotel. A lot of them are lodging facilities. But so just like with other of those emerging lodging models, we keep it on our radar to make sure that it is in compliance with all the appropriate requirements for the license, as well as zoning and building and et cetera. So, we haven't, other than that, we haven't, thought too much about it, but we are looking at, and I'll talk a little bit about this next. It's actually a great segue into our policy update about looking into lodging license, but I definitely want to get to Aaron's question first before I dive into that.
Can I just ask a quick follow-up question to that then? So in terms of the biggest kind of delineator, other than the primary residence requirement for what is a commercial property and what is a short-term rental, is the tax structure, right, that they're paying. So do we know, have we confirmed that, all of these different lodging models are paying the commercial tax structure and not the residential tax structure?
That's a great question. Yeah, every time we learn of a new emerging lodging model, we do check with tax to make sure that they're in compliance with whatever the proper, tax bracket is that they need to be in, most of which are commercial. So as long as they're paying their taxes in a compliant manner, that's not really our wheelhouse, but we do always check because we are on the cutting edge of short-term rentals. So we do like to keep up on that.
Awesome, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Aaron? Oh, you're muted.
Walking over my mute button. I was actually going to just follow up on what Cindy said, and I understand that both Crested Butte and some of the communities in Summit County are going to establish a housing state of emergency for housing with regards to their lack of availability of employee housing. And so it will be curious to see if that designation has any type of impact on how short-term rentals are managed or taxed in those locations.
Interesting. If either of you have good links to share with the group, feel free to email them and I'll send them around.
I can also speak to that a little bit since my company's opening 2 hotels, one in Winter Park and one in Ouray. Yeah, there's just like no employee housing. There's no affordable housing anywhere in the state of Colorado, but it's particularly bad, not just here in Denver, but also in all of the like touristy mountain communities. So yeah, it's not just one town or a few towns. It's not just short-term rentals. It's just that nobody built housing for like 5 years after 2008 happened. And that's really, really coming to, bite us in the butt now.
Well, thanks for the extra insight. As always, if anyone has any good articles to share, like I said, feel free to email me and I'll circulate them around for everybody. I know we're all kind of short-term rental nerds on this call, so always interested in those stories. All right, so as I mentioned, if no one else has any questions here, we'll move on to the policy updates. And so last time we spoke, we were scheduled to go to PRC. We did that on April 30th. And we had talked to them about what the city's priorities are, what the department's priorities should be, as far as where to focus our policy efforts. There were several comments about a second type of short-term rental license that had certain parameters, but was not primary residence oriented. And as in line with PRC, the city will not be pursuing that particular proposal to create a second type of short-term rental license. So there's several pieces to this. And so I figured it would make sense to walk through some of the reasoning why the priority of the city is going to go elsewhere for this time. Starting with public sentiment. So as we've talked about, the primary residence requirement was a key feature in early policy discussions that led lawmakers, city council members at the time to adopt that scheme for licensing rentals in Denver rather than an outright ban like we saw in other cities at that time. Since the licensure went into effect, we had a report from 2019 from DEDO, that's our Economic Development Department, stating that primary residence requirement is the thing that has prevented negative effects from short-term rentals on housing stock and affordability. So it's been a key piece of the success of the license type and the model here in Denver because we've avoided some of those negative effects, such as a housing shortage, due to the rentals being used for short-term rentals. In addition, in just last year, City Council passed our 2 bills to strengthen the primary residence requirement and then improve the enforcement of the requirement through the platform accountability changes. And so, looking at the effects of those with the new compliance software, seeing how those affect the compliance rate and the licensure rate for short-term rentals before we look into any additional changes to the ordinance. In addition to and sort of complementary to these reasons, right, as we discussed with PRC, there are alternative solutions. So we have heard about consumer demand for trends and changes in the way people travel and the way people work and the way people live. And so in looking at that, we see that there are opportunities to modernize our lodging license. So again, a great segue. Which could address the need for more varied commercial accommodations raised by some of the proponents of the type 2 proposal without impacting that short-term rental existing primary residence license that we've been working on since 2017 and even before that. And finally, a key piece here is the focus on equity, right? So the mayor's office feels really strongly that a lot of the recovery and growth efforts need to be looking at, how we can do those efforts in an equitable way. So in our hospitality industry, traditional lodging models were some of the hardest hit, along with restaurants, and bars and other hospitality types of establishments. And I'm going to forget the statistic, but there's a high percentage of workers in those fields who are our lower income, lower wage workers within the city. So when looking at the traditional lodging license that has room for improvement, that affects a lot of our lower income, lower wage workers who were hardest hit by the pandemic, putting that next to the short-term rental industry, which has fared fairly well over the last year and looks to be on pace to recover rapidly. The focus on equity it shows that focusing on development and improvement to the existing lodging license may create opportunities for economic development where they're most needed. So that's kind of the overview. What does that mean for us as a department? As I mentioned at the outset, it means we won't be spending time pursuing or exploring a proposal to create a second type of short-term rental license. Instead, the mayor's office has asked us to focus on looking at that lodging license, seeing how it can be modernized, and creating opportunities for innovation, for recovery, and for economic growth. So I'm sure, does anyone have any questions at this point? I see Erin still has her hand raised, but I don't know if that's from before, if that's a new question.
Sorry, that was from before. I will lower my hand.
No worries. Looks like Councilman Flynn has his hand raised, and then David.
Erica, could you go a little more deeply into the equity tab there and talk about what improvements to the lodging license would address equity issues?
So this is something that we would be relying on Dito or host to kind of weigh in on as well. And it looks like Molly keeps getting kicked off, so she may not be able to talk, but we would definitely want to, as we have with short-term rentals, look at the impact of any changes. So our lodging license actually has not been updated in 70 years or more. There are some very old pieces that don't allow, for example, modernization of record keeping, right? There's still a provision that talks about how all records must be kept in ink or indelible pencil. So, ways that can help the license and the ordinance meet the needs of modern day lodging accommodations. And then looking at some of these emerging lodging models that maybe use the lodging license and being thoughtful about the ways our city has grown and the ways our city will continue to grow to be able to both meet demand while also, taking out some of that bureaucratic either uncertainty or red tape for our existing lodging models. Okay. David, I think you're up.
Yeah, so I guess my question is, what does that process look like? I mean, you mentioned, Ditto and another organization, part of the city government, but like having watched whether it was group living or, any number of other like things where something within the city got overhauled, like it seems like it's a pretty long process. And it involves like multiple organizations coming together within the city and getting, stakeholders from around the city, whether it's business stakeholders or what have you, to become involved in the process and have a hand in, discussing what's working, what's not working, what should change, how it should change, and then putting in front of a whole bunch of people and having public comment. Are we looking at something like that, like a multi-year process, or is this something that's maybe more just along the lines of like, we're fine-tuning language, which I know the city council like often fine-tunes language, and it seems like that happens relatively quickly, like a matter of months when there's something that needs to get through LUDI or one of the other committees, and then it goes in front of the council and it's like, yeah, we're correcting language, we're making things like make sense, or we're correcting a problem. Like, where does this fall, or is it somewhere in between? Like, what does this process look like?
Sure, that's a great question. Because you're all on STRAC. STRAC is a really unique stakeholder body, right? Because it has existed since the establishment of the license, and we don't have a group like that for any other license type, for our department. That said, we have done, you know, very tailored community outreach, stakeholder outreach. Anytime we've updated an ordinance, we just overhauled our marijuana code, and that was a multi-year process with several stakeholder groups, formal, informal. We had a working group to talk about that because there were so many layers to that. We also updated and modernized our security guard license probably about 4 years ago now, and that had a rulemaking work group. We had a lot of public outreach for our common consumption area license that we just opened up applications on. So each of those looked a little different, and they all look different from the STRAC, obviously, and short-term rentals. So, you know, the high level process is that we'll do some internal research. We'll meet internally with some city agencies to see how the process works now, where the pain points are currently, do some community outreach, stakeholder outreach. Obviously, we'll want to involve the Lodgers Association and, you know, providers who are utilizing the license type now. We can certainly provide updates here if that's something you all are interested in. But it kind of, I guess there's no one size fits all, right? As I mentioned, we've had, you know, unique processes depending on the license type, depending on the types of changes that are either suggested internally, that are allowed from, you know, a legal perspective, and then what the demand is from the community. So I know that's not a specific answer, but I think the average time that, you know, an ordinance change, you know, process takes would be about 9 months, a year, give or take less or longer, depending on, you know, the extent of the changes. You know, smaller tweaks versus a complete code overhaul are obviously going to be different. So does that answer your question at all?
Yeah, I mean, it gives me a sense of effectively, paraphrasing here, you guys have to determine the scale of the changes you're trying to make so that you can make a timeline for making the changes. Like there's like, it's like you have to have the meeting before the meeting sort of situation. Like
Sure.
you need a pre-meeting at this point.
Yes, yes. Because I mean, we know that it's out of date, right? We've seen the things that we see when we're, and we just have operational questions, right? About, you know, when we're checking criminal history, because there is a fingerprinting requirement in the lodger's license. You know, so things that could be clarified, right? But if we don't ask our partner agencies, then we're not doing, you know, due diligence to make sure that if we're going to go in and ask for some updates that help us, we may as well be comprehensive about it, especially when it's been this long since there was an update.
Cool. Yeah, I had no idea it had been 70 years. That's ridiculous to me. But yeah, I appreciate the information and sort of like getting this sense of, all right, this is the direction we want to move, because this feels, to me, just personally, I think this is a good direction to kind of revamp the lodger's license, to modernize it and like figure out what the needs of current and future travelers are, rather than, you know, like, I mean, I would have been fine with the second license type for short-term rentals, but like this doesn't seem like a bad way to go, and it seems more comprehensive to me. So that's cool.
Great. Anyone else have any questions? Thoughts?
I have a thought. If we just look at opportunity in the city with our workplace model in transition, it would appear to me that there are more commercial spaces open and available in this city for different kinds of models of lodging. So I think that's where the opportunity lies that way. And where can you do that? How far into the neighborhoods? What zoning areas do you need them to be in to accommodate the new model for people? I think that's where the evolution is going, more commercial buildings that hold, you know, more people, maybe apartment-like looks. I think the city has a great direction with that, not putting it under the short-term rental, just with where the opportunities are right now. So thank you. I appreciate that.
All right. Oh, looks like we have Joe is in the attendees list, so I'll promote her. And then see if there's any other questions or comments on this development. If not, we will move on. It's sort of a short agenda today. All right. Well, with that said, one thing we talked about last time was the topic-specific meetings. With the upcoming meetings for the year, this is a tentative schedule here, so you can kind of see when the topics are that you're interested in, or if you want to do any kind of research or background information. But these are the three big topics that we heard people wanted to learn about most. So we've got in August, we'll have folks from building and zoning come in and kind of give an overview of some of the common violations they see, or things that are kind of, absolutely like must deal with. Brian's talked about this a little bit, and we've had some interest in this. So that'll be the August meeting. So if you have any operators who might be interested, feel free to let them know about that as well. And then in October, we'll look at accessibility. We're going to invite some of our partners that Councilman Hines has connected us with to come talk about accessibility. And we'll try to learn more about that and see if there's anything that this committee wants to talk about when it comes to accessibility in short-term rentals. And then at the end of the year, we will talk about any change in the effects of short-term rentals on housing affordability. As I mentioned, we have that 2019 study, but it is something we want to continue to monitor to make sure that we're always striking the right balance. So if we, have experts from Host or other affordable housing organizations that want to chime in on agenda topics or things that we want to cover, feel free to email me and brainstorm as we put those agendas together. Oh, looks like Dana's got her hand raised.
Yeah, hi. So I have a hard time wrapping my mind around how housing affordability can be impacted if we have a primary residence requirement, because that property would not be occupied. If it's somebody's primary residence, it wouldn't otherwise be on the market for sale, impacting our inventory. So I understand it when there isn't a primary residence, how that can play a role, but I guess I get a little confused around how we can tie those two topics together when we have a primary residence requirement. Because if somebody's renting their home, it wouldn't be on the market for sale, right? So it's just something I've heard mentioned many times over the last year or so, and I always get a little perplexed there. So I don't know if there's a good explanation, but something that is on my mind.
So I don't know if you had, I just had a quick thought, Erica, if I can chime in real quick.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think one thing is that the study that we have that shows that short-term rentals are not having an effect on housing affordability, and as the result of the primary residence requirement and the strict enforcement of that, I think by the end of this year, that study will be 2 years old. And so just getting an update to that study and making sure that nothing's changed and that that primary residence requirement is still maintaining that purpose, and that it's still being an effective tool to make sure there is no negative effect on housing affordability. So that was my thought, I think, along those lines.
Yeah. Same thing, just to make sure, has anything changed? Are there any new factors that didn't exist 2 years ago, affected the pandemic, things like that, and just anything that we should be aware of, and if not, great. But keep, again, making sure that we're constantly reassessing, or not constantly, but, periodically reassessing to make sure that we're still in the right place. Looks like David's next.
Yeah, this actually doesn't have to do with anything in the blue boxes. It actually has to do with what's over on the right side of your slide, which is that like our case counts are going down. They have been going down pretty drastically over the course of the last 3 or 4 months. Is there a chance that maybe our August meeting or our October meeting could be in person? It says here all meetings will be held via Zoom, or has the city of Denver decided that all meetings will be held on Zoom through the end of 2021? I'm wondering.
It's a good question. I'll hop in here too, Erica, if that's okay. So no, there's not been a decision that all meetings must be held virtually through the end of the year. I know City Council is actually going to be returning to in-person meetings pretty quickly here. So I think it's a possibility. I think we want to also be aware that virtual meetings also do increase accessibility to the meetings in some ways too. And so looking at the possibility of a hybrid option where we can be in person, I think there's a great benefit to us all being in the same room together as well. So if there's a hybrid option where we can allow people to attend and participate virtually while still offering that in-person option too. So just some stuff to figure out as far as those details. Things changed quickly over the last month, just as they did in March of 2020. So we will adjust and be flexible as we go forward.
Awesome. That sounds good. Yeah, I know that I planned a birthday party for later this week that was going to have 11 people at it, and we just expanded to 20 because like everybody felt comfortable. So I personally would feel comfortable having, the next meeting in person. That's my view on it. But yeah, cool.
Oh, well, if anyone else has thoughts, if they, want to let us know if they do or don't feel comfortable, we can take that into consideration. And like Molly said, look at some sort of hybrid model so that everyone can participate in the way that makes sense for them. So I think with that, we'll go to public comment. I see we've got one person with their hand raised, Sabrina Calnan. So Sabrina, I will promote you to a panelist. You'll see a little blip. So just hang tight while it gives you the opportunity to talk. All right, you should be able to unmute yourself and give your public comment. Let me know whenever you're ready.
Perfect. I just have a quick question regarding the Zoom link. I've been having a really hard time finding it. It's not posted on the website. I'm not able to find the recordings anywhere. I do get the STR bulletin emails, but I haven't seen one in quite a while. So what's the best way to get this information?
It is usually posted on our website, and that might be my fault. Our webmaster did go on vacation, and I didn't get it to her before she went, so it's not on our website. You're right. So my apologies for that. But the website is usually the best place to find it. And we do have all of our videos. They should be on our STRAC webpage. And if not, they're all on our YouTube channel, which I can send around in our next STR bulletin, just a reminder of where to look for those in case anybody can't find them. Thanks for bringing that up.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Also get in the habit of sending out a bulletin as a reminder prior to every STRAC meeting too, and include, if we can keep going virtual or hybrid, including the Zoom link in that. So thanks for mentioning that.
Thank you.
Let me see if I got any emails from anyone to talk. I did not. Does anyone else have a comment? Looks like Cindy, your hand's raised.
Yes. Have we filled all the positions on the STRAC task force?
We have a range that we can fill. We currently have, we're in the range right now. We're not below the range. And we did one person who's taking a leave of absence for health reasons, but they will be coming back when they're feeling better. So they're remaining on the STRAC and can hop back in whenever they're able.
Okay, I just didn't know if we'd filled Charlotte's position.
We did. that is Joe, who I'm having trouble. I haven't been able to promote to panelists, but she is in attendance in the attendees list.
Oh,
There. So Joe, I don't know if you want to introduce yourself and say hello.
And they upgrade our internet at our office. Just got it back. So thank you. And I'm the president of City Park West.
Thanks. Well, we're happy to have you, and Joe has some great experience with affordable housing too. So she brings that perspective with her to the STRAC in addition to her role in her neighborhood organization. So we're lucky to have her with us. It looks like Susan, you're next with your hand raised.
Yeah, hi Erica and everyone. I don't know if you can see me because I can't see myself, but all that being said, I just wondered, given the topics we talked about today, is there anything for either August or October that you and Molly and the team, you know, would want some subset of us to provide context or research, given kind of the description you gave all the way through commercial housing and equity and some of the work that's underway with not only the PRC, but the mayor's office? Is there anything of use that, you know, we have a lot of, I think, really great people on STRAC that may be able to go off and do analysis or bring data to the city? There's pieces that you're already getting because you've got the resources to do it. But is there some value add in us considering, you know, with these topics, you know, having a small task team or volunteers from STRAC to work on any of these topics? Because it seems to me that one of the greatest values of STRAC is the ability to be an active participant. You know, it's great to listen and to provide feedback on what's kind of coming forward. But I also think that, as you said, so much is changing so rapidly that there might be value add in that equation. I just don't know what the topics would be.
Yeah, absolutely. We're always happy if people want to help do some research and, you know, talk about, I mean, at this point, definitely, if you have ideas for agenda items or bullet points or, you know, subtopics under those kind of larger topics that you really want to focus on, right? You know, I'm thinking of an example in the, you know, building compliance, right? Building and fire compliance, right, is egress windows. If people really want to know about egress windows, that we can, you know, focus intently and have our fire comrades, you know, talk about that. If people want more of a general overview, we can do that as well. So if people have thoughts definitely on any of those topics and subtopics they want to hone in on, I mean, obviously each of those is pretty larger than we could cover in totality in an hour and a half. So yeah, we're totally open to any recommendations, suggestions, or if you say, hey, I know a lot about XYZ, or I'd really like to learn about XYZ and talk about it and help prepare for that. And, you know, with my fellow STRAC members, then feel free to just send me an email and we'll definitely welcome any of that help.
Great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Susan. Looks like we've got Alex with his hand raised, Alex Dodd. So Alex, hang tight while I promote you to a panelist. All right, you should be able to unmute yourself and begin with your public comment.
Hey, Erica, thank you. I was just curious if there was any further details that you could elaborate on from the PRC meeting with the mayor regarding just general sentiment toward short-term rentals, and if there's just how that was perceived from the mayor and how they see that fitting into the lodging mix, if you will, with the city moving forward as we're starting to welcome events and you know, back into Denver again.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, generally, I think there's a sentiment. I mean, I can't speak for everybody, obviously, but Short-term rentals have been around for a little while now. They're still a younger license, and there's been some really great discussion and public input and tweaking of the language to bring it to a place where we think it's, in a really good place. And we want to see the effects of some of those tweaks to make sure they're having the intended effect. Again, looking back on that report, make sure that everything is as we hope and expect and, are operating as it seems. And then there's, on the other end of the spectrum from short-term rentals, is lodging licenses, right? It's an older license, it hasn't been modernized. And, in all the ways, it's kind of different from short-term rentals. It can be, right? Short-term rentals are very resident-led as a opportunity to make some money off of your asset. Lodging license is a commercial entity, right? There's that success we've seen in resiliency in the short-term rental market from folks who, prefer short-term rentals or, like to be able to stay in a more private place versus the traditional, lodging accommodations in hotels who have seen quite a big hit over the past year. So the general, I think, thought is that, short-term rentals are very staunchly one thing with a primary residence requirement. And then the lodging license is a totally separate thing, right? Without a primary residence requirement. And what we're seeing and what we have seen the last couple of years are these emerging lodging models, right? That sort of are not in the middle, but maybe look and feel like a short-term rental in certain ways, either with that privacy or with that accessibility to residential areas, but they're operating in sort of that commercial space. And so looking at some of those emerging lodging models, our traditional lodging models, and looking for opportunities for innovation, for improvement, for modernization, to make sure that we're meeting demands and creating opportunities for growth. So I know it's a mouthful. Does that kind of address your question and your thoughts?
Yeah, it does. And thank you for elaborating on that. And I'm wondering too, if perhaps a lot of other municipalities use the term guest accommodation as an umbrella term to describe these things. Perhaps that might be something that the city, just from a jargon standpoint to look at, since there are these new lodging concepts and just, considering not only the nature of short-term rentals in this very specific lens from like a zoning and policy perspective, but, just kind of considering the overarching needs of guest accommodations here in the city, how that dovetails in with short-term rentals, with lodger's license, with all of the above. And then I guess my last little follow-up with that is what data points or perhaps policy tweaks are, particularly in focus or being monitored to measure success here, or at least, or data points that we're trying to keep an eye on that are of concern too, just so we can maintain the relevance of those if there are any.
And that's a great question. I think that's something we don't necessarily have an answer to yet, but as we do outreach, both with internally in the city among our departments and also with the public and the operators, getting a feel for what that success looks like and what we should be measuring to make sure that, it's not just us thinking about it. It's a collaborative approach like we take with every license update.
Cool. Well, looking forward to see what comes of it. And again, just want to thank the committee for their time and making this happen. Hopefully we'll be able to see everybody in person here soon.
Thanks so much, Alex.
Okay.
All right, looks like Susan, your hand is raised. Do you have another question or comment?
No, I'm so sorry, Erica. I forgot to take it down. I'll do that now. Lower my hand.
As you all know, I'm not the best at technology. I just want to make sure I'm not missing anybody if they have a question again. So, all right. Any other? Doesn't look like we have anyone else in the attendee list, and no one else has their hand raised. So, if anyone else has any other questions or comments about anything we talked about, now's the time. Otherwise, I will give you back a half an hour of your day. No? Okay, we're all on a summertime schedule then. It was great to see you all virtually. I do look forward to seeing you all in person again. And thanks again, Sabrina, for the reminder about the website and bulletin. We'll make sure we get that out so that people are aware of the upcoming topics that we'll be talking about at the future STRAC meetings.
Thanks so much.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Erica.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
Bye, thank you.